Hello and welcome to this channel. It's great to have this chance to explore some thoughts from the Bible with you today. If you were watching Wednesday's video, I'll put the link in the description below just in case you missed it. But you'll remember that we were talking about a man in the Bible called David. He and his men had gone off to battle, but were sent home without fighting, only to discover this in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 3 and 4. When David and his men reached Ziklag, the place that they were staying, they found it destroyed by fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David and his men were absolutely devastated. Just put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You've just had a long 3-day journey to get back to your home. You're exhausted. You're looking forward to going into your house, putting your feet up, gathering your family around you again. Only when you get there, that house that you've known is a burnt out shell. And there is no trace of your family. There are no bodies, and you give thanks for that. But there's no sign at all of those nearest and dearest to you. They have been taken. For what purpose, you don't know. Slavery or torment. You wonder with absolute terror what they are feeling right now and what their captors might be doing to them. You weep for their fate. But before long, that weeping changes and it turns to anger, to rage against the man who leads you. He could have prevented this. You start to think, why did he bring us here in the first place? Why did we go chasing after battle and leaving our people unprotected? David, their leader, had suffered great losses himself. His 2 wives had been captured by the Amalekite raiders, and now he has to face down his own men. The Bible, I think, is wonderful at understatements from time to time. 1 Samuel chapter 30 and verse 6 says that David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. David is facing death at the hands of his men who had rallied to his call, men who had fought with him and protected him, men who he had lifted up. Some of them were criminals who he had given a cause and a second chance. Now they were gathered together debating whether or not they should stone him. And the Bible says that David was distressed. Distressed. I think he'd have been downright terrified and angry at them and at God for letting this happen. His stomach must have been churning, watching these men tossing stones and catching them in their hands, sending menacing glances in his direction. He knew that his life and his future rested on the edge of a knife. Well, this is how verse 6 carried on. David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. In an absolutely appalling situation, David found strength in God. That's an interesting word that's used there, isn't it? To find. Finding something kind of implies looking for something. You know, I've lost my keys. Oh, I found them. In fact, a dictionary definition of the word find, it talks about locating, attaining, or obtaining by search or effort. It can be unexpected as well. You know, you can stumble on something and find it. But in general, to find something We have to be looking for it. If you're feeling out of strength today, if you're feeling overwhelmed by circumstances like David was, then I encourage you to look for strength in God. Turn to him. Pray to him. Ask him to fill you with his strength again. David turned to the Lord, to his own God, to the God he knew and trusted. And in the midst of his despair and his distress and his anger and his tears, he found strength. Well, that strength would carry him and his men on to chase down the Amalekites who had kidnapped their women and children. After that initial 3-day march back home, followed by the emotional exhaustion of finding their families taken, then after chasing the kidnappers down, leaving 200 men behind because they were just too exhausted to continue. After all of that, David led his men in an assault on the raiders, which lasted for a full day. He needed the strength that he had found in God in order to sustain him. I think it's often in hard situations that we find strength, because it's only then that we realize we actually need it. If you're in need of some strength right now, as we consider what this world is going through, what we ourselves personally are going through, then I encourage you to seek after God. You will find it. You will find strength. And who knows, you might need it for whatever comes next in this crazy journey that we're on right now. Don't wait, looking at your circumstances and the fear that looms so close. Seek out strength right now. The Bible tells us that when we seek, we will find. My prayer for you this week is that you would know strength for whatever situation you might find yourself in, that you would know such an abundance of it, that it could only be something that God had given to you. He promises to provide what we need. And if you need strength right now, then look for it and you will find it in God. Thank you so much again for joining me today and this week, for listening to these thoughts from the Bible. I look forward to seeing you next time.